A story of stolen destiny, hidden blood, and a love that could not be hidden. On the night the queen gave birth, two babies breathed the same cold air in the same candlelit room. One would grow up inside silk and gold. The other would grow up inside chains and silence. By the time the sun rose over the kingdom of Aurelia, the choice had already been made. Not by fate. Not by the stars. Not by any force greater than one woman's burning, bottomless jealousy. A midwife wrapped the wrong child in royal cloth. A jealous woman pressed a bag of coins into that midwife's hand. And the true princess was sold, passed from owner to owner like a broken thing nobody wanted, for 18 years. Not the king. Not the queen. Not the girl herself. But tonight, in front of 10,000 watching eyes, under the blazing light of the ancient crown of Aurelia. The lie comes home. Chapter 1, The Night of Betrayal. The kingdom of Aurelia celebrated that night. Lanterns burned on every gate post. Wine flowed through the lower city. Drums beat in the market squares. The queen had delivered safely. The royal line continued. Every citizen of Aurelia had reason to rejoice. Everyone except Eula. She stood in the corridor outside the royal birthing chamber, her hands folded in front of her, her face wearing the shape of a smile. A careful smile. The kind a person builds when the one underneath would betray everything. Eula had been Queen Kara's closest friend since childhood. They had grown up together, shared secrets, promised each other forever. But that was before Kara married a king. Before the palace. Before the jewels. Before the way everyone in the room turned toward Kara, the way flowers turned toward sunlight. Eula had watched it all. And she had grown something dark in her chest, year by year, watered by comparison, fed by silence. She slipped away from the corridor before anyone noticed her absence. Down the servants' stairs. Past the kitchens. Down further, where the palace met the old stone bones of the dungeon wing, where the only light was tallow candles and the only sound was dripping water. Leslie was already waiting. Leslie had been the kingdom's most trusted midwife for 20 years. Her hands had delivered half the noble children in Aurelia. She was known for steadiness, for silence, for never once speaking out of place. People trusted her the way they trusted old stone walls. They assumed her loyalty was as solid as her reputation. They had never seen what jealousy could purchase. 2 baskets rested on the floor between them. One lined with embroidered white wool, smelling faintly of lily water and cedar, the royal baby's basket, prepared for the queen's daughter. One lined with rough, unbleached cloth, a basket that smelled of a servant quarter's wooden floor. Leslie had carried the queen's newborn daughter here without a sound. The baby slept with the deep, perfect stillness of the newly born, her tiny fists curled, her chest rising and falling, knowing nothing of the world she had arrived in or the danger already standing over her. Eula looked at that baby for a long moment. She looked at the fine small features. The particular curve of the nose that was exactly like King Malot's. The way the dark lashes rested against the child's cheek. There was already something regal in the way this infant slept, as if she knew at some wordless level that she belonged to something larger. Eula reached down and picked up her own daughter from the rough basket. Her daughter. Born the same week. Born to the same midwife. Born to a woman the palace considered nothing more than a guest of the queen, a courtesy, a remnant of an old friendship nobody paid much attention to anymore. This cannot be undone, Leslie said quietly. Her voice did not shake. It held the flat, careful steadiness of a woman who has crossed a line and is simply noting the fact. I know what it is, Eula said. She placed her own daughter into the white wool basket. She smoothed the cloth. She lifted the queen's daughter and placed her into the rough cloth. The royal child made a small sound in her sleep, a tiny murmur of protest, and then went still. What will you do with her? Leslie asked. Eula did not answer right away. She looked at the true princess lying in rags. Something passed across her face, something that may have been shame, or may have been a door swinging shut on the last of her conscience. She will not stay in this kingdom, Eula said at last. I will find someone who will take her far away. Someone who will pay enough to make sure she never comes back. Leslie looked at her. You are going to sell her. I am going to make sure she never finds her way home. Leslie said nothing more. She had made her choice the moment she carried that basket down the stairs. Eula wrapped the true princess tighter against the cold. Not from tenderness. Only to keep her alive long enough to be handed over. Outside the palace walls, a storm moved in from the north. Lightning touched the far mountains. Thunder rolled low and long across the kingdom, like something enormous clearing its throat. By morning, the queen held the wrong baby in her arms and wept with joy. And the true princess was 3 hours outside the capital, wrapped in rags, in the arms of a merchant who had paid 12 silver pieces for her and asked no questions. Chapter 2, Sold like property. The merchant sold her to a farmer's widow before the season turned. The widow sold her to a wool trader when she could no longer afford extra mouths. The wool trader passed her to a tanner when work slowed. The tanner sold her to a woman who ran a laundry house at the edge of a river town, and that woman held her for 4 years, the longest any single owner ever kept her, until the laundry house burned down and she moved on with nothing. Her name, by that point, was Colette. She did not know who had given her that name. She had been called other things in other places. She answered to whatever she was told to answer to. She had learned early that the less she made of herself, the safer she was. But Colette had a quality that none of her owners could account for and none of them could quite break. She did not stop hoping. Not loudly. Not in a way that called attention to itself. She did not declare her hope. She simply held it somewhere very deep and very quiet, in a place the years of hard work and hunger and cold could not reach. She woke each morning and found it still there. She went to sleep each night and checked, and it was still there. She would find a better life. She did not know how. She did not know when. But she believed it the way children believe the sun will come back after a storm, not because anyone has told them why, but because it always has. By the time Colette turned 18, she had slept in 17 different places, done every kind of labor that could be asked of a person her size, and carried herself through all of it with a quiet, steady dignity that confused people who expected her to be defeated. She was not large. She was not physically imposing. She was a slight girl with deep brown eyes that saw more than most people expected, and a posture that stayed straight no matter how heavy the load, as if her spine was the one part of her no one had ever managed to bend. She had no idea that her posture was a king's posture. She had no idea that her stillness in the face of cruelty was the exact stillness that Queen Kara had been famous for since girlhood. She knew only that she was nobody. She had been told so enough times that she had almost finished believing it. Almost. Chapter 3, The Palace Servant. The palace steward came to the market town on the last day of the season, looking for capable hands ahead of the royal tournament. The palace always needed extra staff before the tournament. The event drew nobles, merchants, foreign dignitaries. The kitchens ran without stop. The laundries never emptied. The corridors needed scrubbing at every hour. The steward was a practical man. He paid fair wages for palace work. He did not care about origin or history. He looked at the candidates lined up in the market square, and when his eyes landed on Colette, he paused. There was something in the way she stood. Something that did not belong in a line of day laborers. He could not name it. He simply marked her name on his list and moved on. Colette arrived at the Palace of Aurelia on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. She entered through the servants' gate at the east wall, just as the sun cleared the palace towers and flooded the courtyard with light. She stopped. Just for a moment. She stood in that courtyard and looked up at the towers and the banners and the carved stone archways, and something moved inside her chest, something she could not explain and did not try to. She had never been here before. It felt like she had. She was assigned to the lower hall scrubbing team. She slept in a storage room off the east kitchen corridor with 3 other girls. She worked from before dawn until the household settled at night. She scrubbed floors. She carried water. She polished candlesticks until her fingers cramped. She said very little. She noticed everything. She noticed, for example, that the palace felt uneasy. There was a tension in the way the senior servants spoke to each other. A careful quality to how people moved around the princess's wing. Colette did not know what it meant. She filed it away and kept her head down. On her 4th day, she was carrying a bucket of water down the main corridor when a door opened ahead of her and 2 figures walked out. One was Princess Kayla. The other was Prince William. Colette had seen royalty at a distance during her years of service, local lords, a distant duke once, a noblewoman who had passed through a town. But she had never been this close. Kayla was dressed in deep blue silk with silver at her throat. Her hair was dark and elaborately arranged. She moved with the practiced ease of someone who has spent her entire life being watched and has decided to make that an advantage. She was beautiful in a way that was clearly aware of itself. She did not look at Colette. William was the one who looked. He was tall, with a lean, alert quality that suggested he spent more time in practice yards than in throne rooms. His dark coat was plain for a prince, his expression thoughtful. He was in the middle of saying something to Kayla when he noticed Colette in the corridor, not because she had done anything to attract notice, but because there was something about the way she stood holding that bucket, straight-backed, steady-eyed, that did not fit the usual landscape of palace corridor life. He held the door open for her. Not out of ceremony. Just, he held it open, the way you might hold a door for anyone. Colette walked through without slowing down. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes forward and her pace even, and she told herself the warmth in her face was from the weight of the bucket. Kayla, 2 steps ahead, had not noticed the exchange. But she had an instinct, sharpened over years of watching William's attention, for when something was off. She turned and looked back down the corridor at the servant girl's retreating figure. She looked for 3 full seconds. Then she turned away. Chapter 4, A Prince's Curiosity. William had not intended to notice her again. He noticed her the next morning when she was in the east courtyard before dawn, pulling water from the deep well, moving without hesitation in the dark the way people do when they have done hard things in dark places for a long time and have simply stopped being afraid of the dark. He noticed her 3 days after that when she was in the training yard's outer path, watching through the fence as the palace guards ran drills. Not watching with longing, exactly. Watching with the focused, absorbing attention of someone who is learning. He stopped beside her. "You study them," he said. It was not a question. Colette turned. She had not heard him approach. She found the prince standing a step away, arms crossed, looking at the same drill she had been watching. "I was just passing," she said. "You were not just passing. You were counting their footwork." A pause. She did not confirm it. She did not deny it. "The royal tournament," he said. "Are you planning to enter?" She looked at him squarely, which surprised him. Servants, in his experience, rarely looked directly at him. Not from disrespect but from a trained habit of self-reduction. This girl looked at him the way an equal might. "I am a palace servant," she said. "The tournament is open to any commoner over 16. That is the law. Has been for 100 years. The law and what people actually allow are not always the same thing, Your Highness." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "They are not. But you could enter regardless." She did not answer. She pulled her gaze away from the training yard, shifted the empty water jug onto her hip, and walked back toward the palace. William watched her go. He thought about the way she had said, "The law and what people actually allow are not always the same thing." As if she had spent a great deal of time on the wrong side of that gap and had simply come to accept it as the way the world worked. He found that it sat badly in him. Kayla found him still at the fence. "What were you looking at?" she asked. "The morning drill." Kayla glanced down the path in the direction Colette had gone. Then back at William. "I want that servant girl reassigned to the outer laundry," Kayla said. "Kayla. She should not be wandering near the training areas. It is not appropriate." William said nothing. The reassignment order was never filed. Chapter 5, The Tournament Begins. The royal tournament of Aurelia began on the first morning of the harvest month, when the air turned crisp and the palace banners were changed from everyday crimson to the gold and white of the tournament season. It was a 5-day event. Open combat on the first 2 days. Mounted challenges on the third. The endurance trials on the fourth. And the final championship on the 5th day, before the royal family and the full assembled court. The prize was enormous by any standard. Full freedom papers, if the contestant was in bonded service. A chest of gold. And most coveted of all, a position in the royal guard, carrying the protection of the crown itself. Colette registered on the last hour of the first morning. She gave her name to the tournament official, a broad man named Jan who had overseen registration for 11 years and had never in his career hesitated over a form the way he hesitated now. "You are a palace servant?" he said. "I am. The rules say anyone over 16, born in the kingdom, may register. I was born in this kingdom. I am over 16. Jan looked at her. He looked down at the form. He looked at the line of merchants and tradesmen and former soldiers behind her. He stamped the form. Word spread by midday. By the time the afternoon round started, enough of the crowd knew about the palace servant who had entered that a low murmur ran through the stands every time Colette stepped into the open combat ring. Not cheering. Not yet. Just awareness. The crowd watching with the sharp, waiting attention of people who sense something unusual is about to happen and are not sure yet whether to encourage it or mock it. Her first opponent was a blacksmith from the lower city. Twice her weight. Twice her reach. He rolled his neck when he saw her across the ring and turned to his corner with a laugh. The bell rang. He moved toward her with the confidence of a man who has never lost to a smaller opponent and cannot imagine starting now. Colette did not move back. She moved sideways. She had spent years watching guards train through fences and courtyard gates. She had observed every pattern, every footwork sequence, every tell. She had practiced in the storage room at night, in the space between her sleeping mat and the far wall, moving in near silence while her roommates slept. The blacksmith was strong. He was not precise. She used his weight against him twice and put him on the ground in under 4 minutes. The crowd did not cheer. It went completely, utterly silent. Then it erupted. In the royal box, Kayla set down her cup. Chapter 6, The Girl Who Would Not Fall. The second day brought harder opponents. A former soldier who had spent 8 years in border campaigns. A merchant's son who had trained with the best combat masters his father's money could buy. A woman who had won the tournament in a neighboring province 2 years running. Colette did not win every match cleanly. She took hits. She lost points. She was put on her knees twice. Once by the former soldier, who was faster than she expected, and once by the provincial champion, who was both fast and precise. Both times, she got up. That was what the crowd began to respond to. Not just the wins. The getting up. There was something in the way she rose that said this person has been on the ground before and has made peace with the fact that the ground is not where she belongs. By the end of the second day, the crowd was chanting her name. Colette. 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 A palace servant. A nobody. A girl without a title, a family, or a single noble sponsor. The nobles in the stands watched with open contempt. This was not how the tournament was supposed to go. The tournament was supposed to filter upward, confirm that those born to strength and training were indeed stronger and better trained. It was not supposed to produce a servant girl as a champion. Several of them went to the tournament committee with complaints. The tournament committee pointed to the rules, which had not changed in 100 years, and said there was nothing to be done. Mildred, the senior palace servant who had quietly slipped Colette extra food during the training days, pressed a small cloth bag into her hands on the evening of the second day. "Wrist wrap," she said gruffly. "Your left wrist is favoring. I can see it from the corridor. Wrap it before tomorrow or you will lose the feeling in your fingers by midday." Colette looked at her. "You have been watching." "Half the kitchen has been watching," Mildred said, "but none of them would admit it if you asked. They do not want to get caught hoping." She walked away before Colette could respond. Colette looked down at the wrist wrap in her hands. It was the first gift she had received in as long as she could remember. William came to the training yard that evening. Not officially. Not in any capacity that would be noted. He simply appeared at the far end of the yard when the light was low and stood there while Colette worked through her footwork drills, and after a time he walked over and said nothing for a while, just watched. "The noble delegation filed a protest," he said finally. "I know. It was denied." She looked over at him. "Was that you?" "The rules are the rules," he said. "I simply reminded them of that." The yard was very quiet. The lanterns along the wall burned orange in the early dark. Somewhere across the palace, music drifted from the tournament reception in the great hall. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you are the most interesting person in this palace right now," he said. "And because what I see in you when you fight, I have seen it in very few people. Certainly none of them were afraid of it the way you seem to be. I am not afraid." "You are afraid of wanting something this much," he said. "There is a difference." She turned back to her drills. But she did not deny it. He stayed until the lanterns began to burn low, watching her work, and somewhere in that quiet he became aware that he was not watching a servant anymore. He was not sure what he was watching. He only knew that the hour passed far faster than it should have, and when she finally stopped and looked over at him, something in the way she looked at him with those steady, unreadable eyes made the air feel different than it had before. He left before he said anything he was not ready to say. Chapter 7, The Crown Chooses. The fifth day arrived like something the kingdom had been holding its breath for. The tournament arena filled before sunrise. 10,000 people pressed into the stands. The royal box was draped in gold and white. The king sat upright on his ceremonial chair, his face composed in the careful expression of a man who has learned over many years to give nothing away. Beside him, Queen Kara held her hands together in her lap and watched the arena with the same expression she wore every year, pride in ceremony and the faint ache of a happiness that had always felt, in ways she could never explain, slightly incomplete. Kayla sat to the queen's right. She wore white silk and her grandmother's diamonds and a smile that did not reach her eyes. She had been informed that Colette was in the final three. She had not responded to that information. She had simply looked out the window of her dressing room for a long moment and then said, very quietly, to her companion Caitlin, that she needed a moment alone. Caitlin had closed the door and stood outside it and listened to the silence inside. The finals began at mid-morning. 3 champions remained after the 4th-day trials. Colette was one of them. A former border soldier named Davin was another. A wealthy merchant's son named Rowan, who had trained since childhood and fought with a precision that had cost him almost no points across 4 days, was the third. Rowan fell in the first final round. It was not expected. He had been favored by every noble in the stands. He fell cleanly and without drama, put down by Davin with a move so fast the crowd barely processed it before he was on the ground. Then Davin faced Colette. He was larger than anyone she had faced. Harder. 8 years of real border fighting had given him a quality that practice yards could not manufacture, a calm, economizing violence, nothing wasted, nothing performed. He looked at her across the arena with something that was not contempt. It was close to respect. The respect you give to a problem that requires your full attention. The fight lasted 12 minutes. It was the most complete silence an Aurelian crowd had ever produced. Not because nothing was happening. Because too much was happening, too fast, too consequential. Colette went down twice. Twice she got up. The third time she went down, she rolled instead of landing flat, came up inside his guard before he had recovered his balance, and ended it. The arena sound hit her like a wave. Tens of thousands of voices. Her name and noise and a roar of something she had never been on the receiving end of in her entire life, recognition. Collective, overwhelming recognition. You exist. We see you. You are here. She stood in the middle of the arena and breathed through it. She did not cry. She wanted to. She did not. Then came the ceremony. The ancient crown of Aurelia was brought out on a cushion of dark velvet, carried by 4 royal guards. It was not a large crown. It was old, its gold darkened by centuries, its stones, deep red and deep blue, burning with more light than the afternoon sun seemed able to fully account for. According to the kingdom's oldest tradition, the crown of Aurelia was placed before the tournament champion as a symbol of the kingdom's recognition. It was a ceremony. A formality. A ritual with a specific, known outcome. It had never, in recorded history, done anything unexpected. Jan, the tournament official, carried the cushion to the center of the arena. He set it down. He began the ceremonial words, words he had read from the same scroll for 11 years, words that concluded with the presenting official placing the crown gently on the champion's head. He never reached that part of the ceremony. Because the crown moved. Not dramatically. Not violently. Gently, slowly, with a kind of inevitability, as if it had simply been waiting for permission. It rose from the velvet cushion. Just a few inches at first. The jewels blazed, that deep red and deep blue going suddenly, blindingly bright, brighter than the stones should have been capable of. The arena went silent in a way it had not gone silent before. The previous silence had been attention. This was something else. This was awe. This was the silence of 10,000 people confronting something they did not have a category for. The crown drifted. Slowly, weightlessly, it moved across the arena. Past Jan, who had gone completely still. Past the nobles. Past the royal box. Past Kayla, who had come to her feet without realizing it, her face a map of something she had never felt before, fear. Past the king. Past the queen, who pressed both hands to her mouth. And settled, soft and certain, onto Colette's head. The jewels went quiet. The light subsided. Colette stood in the center of the arena, a crown on her head and 10,000 people staring at her, and she did not move for a very long moment. Then she looked up. She looked at the royal box. She looked at the king, who had gone the color of stone. She looked at the queen, whose hands were still pressed to her mouth and whose eyes, Colette's eyes, were filling with tears she could not yet explain. The kingdom fell silent. The crown had spoken. Chapter 8, The Scandal Explodes. The next 48 hours were the most turbulent in Aurelia's recent history. The king ordered the arena cleared immediately and the royal household locked down. Colette was taken, not unkindly, to a secure chamber in the east wing. 4 guards stood at her door. She was told only that investigations were underway. She was brought meals. She was not harmed. She sat on the chamber's single chair and looked at the tapestry on the wall and tried to make sense of the fact that an ancient crown had chosen her. She could not make sense of it. She had never made sense of the particular feeling she got in this palace, the feeling of a song she knew the tune to but could not recall the words of. She had put it down to exhaustion, or imagination, or the strange disorientation of living somewhere so different from everywhere she had lived before. She sat with that feeling now. She let it sit. Down in the palace records office, Kurt was working. Kurt was the kingdom's head investigator, a quiet, meticulous man who communicated primarily in documents and who had spent 20 years building a reputation for finding the one thing that was not supposed to be found. He had been summoned by the king within an hour of the ceremony. He had begun with the birth records for the year Colette was said to have been born. Birth records in Aurelia were kept in triplicate, palace copy, church copy, city archive copy. They were notoriously difficult to falsify all three at once. They had not been falsified all three at once. The palace copy was clean. The church copy showed a notation, a small irregularity in the ink and the spacing, suggesting it had been amended after the fact. The city archive copy was missing for the relevant year. A missing archive year. Kurt sat back. He pulled up the records for the kingdom's midwives registered in the year of the Queen's delivery. Leslie's name was in the records. He noted something else. Leslie had retired abruptly, 6 months after the Queen's delivery, and relocated to a small property at the kingdom's northern border. She had lived there, as far as the records showed, ever since. Kurt wrote 2 words on his notepad. Find Leslie. Meanwhile, in Kayla's chambers, a different kind of crisis was unfolding. Kayla had not slept. She had been sitting at her window since they returned from the arena, and her companion Caitlin had been with her, and there were things Caitlin knew, things Caitlin had observed over years of palace life, things Caitlin had noticed without quite understanding, that were now assembling themselves in her mind into a shape she could not look away from. Kayla, Caitlin said carefully. When we were children, you once asked your mother why you did not smell like the other royals. Why the scent that all the senior nobles mentioned, the one they said identified the bloodline, why you did not have it. Kayla did not turn from the window. My mother said it was a hereditary variation. Yes. She said that. Silence. The servant girl, Caitlin said softly. In the arena. I was close enough, Kayla. I noticed. She has it. That scent. The one the senior nobles have been shifting uncomfortably around for 20 years because you do not. Kayla turned from the window. Her face was not the face of someone hearing impossible news. It was the face of someone hearing confirmation of a fear she had been carrying for a long time. Leave, she said. Kayla. Leave. Caitlin left. Kayla sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the floor and waited for the world to end. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. Chapter 9, Truth and Consequences. Leslie did not wait to be brought in. She arrived at the palace gate on the morning of the 3rd day with a leather satchel pressed against her chest and a look on her face of a woman who has been waiting 20 years for a knock that never came, and has finally decided to knock herself. The guards brought her to Kurt. Kurt looked at the satchel. He looked at Leslie. He said nothing. Leslie placed the satchel on the table between them. Everything is inside, she said. The original birth records. Both of them. The original, unaltered copies I kept for myself because I have always known that a woman who does a thing like this either destroys everything or keeps everything. There is no safety in the middle. I chose to keep. Why? Kurt said. She was quiet for a moment. Because I am old and I have had 20 years to think about what I did. And because that girl in the arena. She held herself the way the queen holds herself. She always did. Even as a child, every owner who passed her along said there was something about her they could not break and could not explain. I heard the stories. I told myself it was nothing. She touched the satchel. It was not nothing. Kurt opened the satchel. The records were there. Stamped. Dated. Original seals. Colette, daughter of King Malott and Queen Kara. Born on the 12th day of the winter month, 20 years ago, in the royal birthing chamber of the Palace of Aurelia. Kurt read the document twice. Then he sent for the king. Eula was brought in before evening. She walked into the throne room with her chin up and her hands steady and wore the expression of a woman who has decided that composure is the only thing left available to her. She looked at the king. She looked at the queen. She looked at the records on the table between them. She said nothing for a long time. 20 years, King Malott said. His voice was very quiet. The quietness of a man who is containing something enormous. For 20 years, my daughter grew up passed between strangers. Sold. Worked. Treated as nothing. And you sat at my table. You sat in our home. You held our trust. Eula looked at the queen. Something shifted in her face. The composure did not hold all the way. I know what I did, she said. Then tell me why, Queen Kara said. Her voice was steady in a way that was clearly costing her everything. Tell me why. The room was completely still. Because you had everything, Eula said. Her voice cracked on the last word. And you never even noticed that I had nothing. You never noticed. Not once in all those years did you look at me and see that I was disappearing beside you. I stopped existing in every room you walked into. And I could not bear it anymore. I could not bear it. Silence. Queen Kara looked at the woman who had been her closest friend. The woman who had stolen her daughter. The woman who had taken her child's first 18 years. She said, very quietly, guards. Eula was taken away. She did not resist. Queen Kara sat very still for a long moment after the doors closed. Then she pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. Where is she? She said. Where is my daughter? Chapter 10, The Princess Comes Home. They brought Colette to the throne room as the sun went down. She walked through the doors not knowing what was waiting on the other side of them. She had spent 3 days in the east chamber with the guards at her door and the tapestry on the wall and very little else, and she had done what she always did in uncertain places. She had stayed still. She had breathed. She had waited. The throne room held the king, the queen, Kurt, and 4 senior advisors. It did not hold Kayla. Colette walked to the center of the room and stood. Queen Kara rose from her chair. She crossed the room and stood in front of Colette and looked at her. Looked at her the way you look at something you thought you had lost forever and cannot yet fully believe is real. She looked at the shape of her face. The eyes. The way she stood. She reached out and touched Colette's face very lightly with both hands. Colette went very still. She did not understand yet. She would understand in a moment. She would understand when Kurt laid the records on the table and explained them and the king spoke, and all of it would become clear in a way that rearranged everything she had ever believed about herself. But before any of that, before the documents and the explanations, she looked at this woman's face. And felt, in the same wordless, bone-deep way she had felt walking through the palace gate on her first morning, that she had been in this place before. That this was a room she belonged in. That this was a face she had been waiting her entire life to recognize. Queen Kara's voice was barely above a whisper. You look exactly like your father when he was young, she said. I have been looking for you for 20 years. I just did not know I was looking. Colette looked at her. Who are you? She asked. I am your mother. The room was silent. The king stood. Colette stood in the center of the throne room and felt the floor of everything she had ever known shift beneath her. Not crumble, not break, but shift, rearrange, like a picture that has been held sideways finally being turned the right way. She had been nobody. She had been sold, passed along, reduced, worked. She had been told in 100 different ways, by 100 different people, that she had no value and no place. And she had believed it. Almost. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked at the woman in front of her. And for the first time in 18 years, Colette wept. Chapter 11, What Justice Looks Like. The kingdom took 3 days to fully understand what had happened. The announcement was made from the palace steps by the king himself, in front of a crowd that had been gathering since dawn. He was not a man who was comfortable with public emotion, but he did not avoid it that day. He told the truth plainly, without deflection. His true daughter had been stolen and sold at birth. She had grown up in slavery. She had come to his own palace as a servant. And the crown that had been in his family for 700 years had recognized her. Aurelia did not go quietly. There was anger. There were protests outside the palace gate. There were demands for investigations, for accountability, for explanation. Kurt provided them all, in writing, through the official channels, with his characteristic thoroughness. Eula was held for formal trial. Leslie was tried separately, the testimony she had voluntarily provided considered during sentencing. Kayla was not tried. Kayla had been a child. She had not chosen the life she was given, any more than Colette had chosen the one she received. The distinction mattered, and Colette said so, clearly, when the advisors put the question to her. It was the first formal statement she made as the recognized heir. It was not the statement anyone had expected. Kayla received it in her chambers through an official letter. She read it twice. Then she sat at her desk for a long time. She had spent 3 days inside herself, in a darkness she had not known before. Her whole identity had been built on something that was not real. Everything she believed about herself, her blood, her right, her place, was architecture on false ground. She had no name for herself right now. She did not know what she was outside of what had been given to her. She wrote Colette a letter. It was 2 sentences long. It said, I do not know what to say except that I am sorry I never questioned it. I think some part of me always knew something was wrong, and I was afraid of that part. Colette read it. She folded it and kept it. She did not write back immediately. She would. In time. Chapter 12, A Love That Could Not Be Hidden. William found her in the East Garden on the evening after the announcement. She was sitting on the stone bench near the old fountain, the one she had passed every morning on her way from the servants' corridor to the kitchen. She was sitting very still, the way she always sat when she was thinking, straight-backed, hands in her lap, looking at something in the middle distance that nobody else could see. He sat down beside her without ceremony. They were quiet for a moment. How are you? He asked. I am not sure I have an answer to that yet. You do not need to. She looked at him. Everything I knew about myself was wrong. Not everything, he said. The part of you that refused to stop. The part that got up every time. The part that watched through fences and practiced in a storage room and walked into a tournament that every reasonable person would have told you was not for you. That was not a lie. That was you. She was quiet for a moment. You knew I practiced in the storage room? The sound carries. I walked past it 3 nights in a row before I understood what I was hearing. Something shifted in her face. The smallest beginning of a smile. Not the performed kind. The kind that comes from someone who has forgotten for a moment that they were supposed to be sad. William looked at her. He had been thinking about what he wanted to say for 3 days. He had thought about the right time, the right setting, the appropriate consideration for everything she was going through. He had decided he would wait until things settled. Until she found her footing. "I know this is not the right moment," he said. "Then wait," she said. "I have been waiting since the third morning when I saw you at the well in the dark." She looked at him. "You noticed me that far back?" "You are not easy to not notice," he said. "I tried. I was not particularly successful." The garden was warm and still. The fountain made its low, constant sound. The lanterns along the path burned gold in the fading light. Colette looked at this man who had held a door open for her when he did not need to, who had reminded a noble delegation of the rules he knew mattered to her, who had stood at a fence and watched her practice because he did not want to leave. She looked at him for a long moment. "Ask me," she said quietly. "Whatever it is you have been not saying. Ask me." He took a breath. "Would you give me the chance to be worth your attention, when you are ready to give it?" The garden was very quiet. "You already have it," she said. He did not move immediately. He did not reach for her hand or close the distance between them. He simply sat with what she had said and let it settle, the way you let something precious settle when you are afraid of dropping it. Then, slowly, he reached over and placed his hand over hers on the bench between them. She did not pull away. They sat like that as the light went the rest of the way down and the first stars came out over the palace of Aurelia. Chapter 13, The Princess She Was Born to Be. The formal coronation ceremony was set for 6 weeks after the announcement. 6 weeks was not a long time to prepare a royal coronation, but Aurelia did not need more. The kingdom had been holding its breath since the arena. It was ready. Colette spent those 6 weeks learning. She learned royal protocol from a patient, elderly advisor named Lord Harston, who had educated 2 previous heirs and who treated her with the same measured respect he had given them. She learned the names of the noble families, the history of the kingdom, the structure of the court, the ceremonial texts. She was a fast learner. She had always been a fast learner. She simply had never been given things worth learning. She visited Mildred in the kitchen on the 3rd week. Mildred was at the stove, as she always was. She did not turn around when Colette came in, though she clearly heard the door. "You are not supposed to be in the kitchen anymore," Mildred said. "I was not told that." "You were told a lot of things this week. Do not tell me you read all of them." Colette sat on the kitchen stool she had always used. Mildred kept her back to her for another moment. Then she turned and set a cup of tea on the counter in front of her with a decisive thud. "You are going to be a fine one," Mildred said gruffly. "You are going to be a fine princess because you know what the floors look like and how heavy the water is and what the cold feels like in a room with no fire. Do not lose that when they put the crown on you." Colette looked at her. "I will not," she said. "Good." Mildred turned back to the stove. Colette drank her tea. She visited Kayla once, in the 3rd week. The visit was not arranged by anyone. She simply went to the chambers that Kayla had been permitted to retain during the transition period and knocked. Kayla opened the door herself. She looked at Colette. She looked like someone who had slept very little and eaten only enough to keep standing. Colette did not say anything profound. She did not forgive dramatically or deliver a speech. She said that Kayla was welcome to remain in the palace in some official capacity that fit her abilities, if she wanted that, and that the decision was hers to make. She said, "I am not your enemy. What was done to us was done by someone else. We are both the result of something we did not choose." Kayla stood in the doorway and said nothing for a long moment. "You are a better person than I would be," she said finally, "if our positions were reversed." "You do not know that," Colette said. "You have never been where I have been." She left. She did not wait for an answer. Kayla stood in the doorway for a while after she had gone. The coronation day arrived clear and cold. The entire city came. Streets lined with people. Windows thrown open. Children on shoulders. The ancient cathedral packed to every wall and the crowd spilling out the doors and down the steps into the square. Colette walked the center aisle alone. No escort. She had requested that specifically. She wore white and gold. Her hair was up, simply arranged. No jewels yet. Those came at the end. She walked with her back straight and her eyes forward and her pace measured, and she looked like someone who has been practicing for something all her life and finally has the space to do it. She reached the altar. The king was waiting. He placed his hands on her shoulders and looked at her for a moment before the ceremony began. Looked at her the way a man looks at something he almost lost without knowing it, the weight of those 18 years and all their missing moments present in his face. "I am sorry," he said quietly. Only her. Only in that moment. She met his eyes. "I know," she said. That was enough. The crown was placed on her head. The jewels blazed deep red and deep blue, the same colors, the same light, the same blazing recognition as in the arena. 10,000 people gathered in the square outside heard the sound from inside the cathedral, a sound like an exhale, a collective release of something held far too long. The true princess had come home. Colette stood beneath the crown and felt it settle on her head, felt it the way you feel something that was always yours finally returned. She looked out at the faces before her. Noble and common. Young and old. People who had cheered for her in the arena and people who had doubted her and people who simply could not believe that this was the same girl who had scrubbed their corridor floor 3 weeks ago. She was the same girl. That was precisely the point. She had not become worthy when they put the crown on her. She had been worthy all along. 3 months after the coronation, William proposed. He did it in the East Garden, at the fountain, on the same bench where they had sat that evening when the announcement had just been made and nothing had settled yet. He brought no ceremony. No audience. No official witness. Just himself, in a plain dark coat, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother and that she had left specifically for, he told Colette. The one he chose freely, without political arrangement, without pressure or expectation. Colette looked at the ring. She looked at him. "You are certain," she said. Not doubting. Just checking. The way she checked everything important. "I have been certain since the storage room," he said. "I was just waiting for you to catch up." She took the ring. She said yes. Mildred found out from Caitlin, who had overheard from across the garden, and celebrated by making Colette's favorite meal. A simple vegetable stew from the eastern provinces, the same kind she had been making for the kitchen staff since before Colette arrived, and leaving it at her door with no note. Colette knew exactly who it was from. Kayla accepted the position Colette had offered her. She became a cultural ambassador, working with the kingdom's neighboring territories on trade and diplomatic relationships. She was good at it. She had spent her entire life reading rooms and managing impressions. Skills that turned out to be genuinely useful when directed towards something legitimate. She and Colette were never close. They were something more complex than that, and more honest. They were two women shaped by the same crime, finding their own separate ways out of it. Eula's trial concluded in the spring. The sentence was exile, permanent removal from the Kingdom of Aurelia, all titles and holdings surrendered, no return permitted in her lifetime. She left without a public statement. Leslie received a suspended sentence in recognition of her testimony. She lived out her years at the northern border property, tending a small garden. She was not happy. She was not entirely unhappy. She had put down a weight she had carried for 2 decades, and the absence of it, even without the redemption she might have wished for, was something. Queen Kara spent many evenings in Colette's company during that first year. She was learning her daughter the way you learn someone you have missed entirely, not with the seamless ease of a relationship grown from the beginning, but with the deliberate, careful tenderness of people who understand the full value of what they nearly never had. They walked in the garden. They read the same histories together. The queen told Colette stories about the kingdom's past, about her own girlhood, about the woman Colette's grandmother had been. Colette listened. She asked questions. She filed every answer in that deep, quiet place she had always kept her hope. It was full now. Kurt closed the official case file on the baby swap in the summer of the following year. On the last page, in his characteristically sparse style, he wrote a single observation. The truth was never buried. It was simply waiting to be recognized. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. What this story teaches us. Every story worth telling carries something real inside it. Here is what Colette's story leaves behind. Jealousy is the quietest destroyer. Eula did not begin with cruelty. She began with comparison. She looked at her friend's life and decided that her own had less value, and that conviction grew until it cost a child her entire childhood. Jealousy does not announce itself. It grows slowly, in silence, fed by everything we refuse to say out loud. The lesson is not to avoid comparison entirely. Comparison is human. The lesson is to speak the thing before it becomes a decision you cannot undo. Status does not determine worth. Colette spent 18 years being told by circumstances, by every cold room, every new owner, every hard task, that she was nothing. She was never nothing. Her worth was constant throughout. The crown recognized what was always true. We do not become valuable when the world decides to recognize us. We are valuable whether the world sees it or not. The truth always finds a way into the light. Eula covered every track she could. Leslie held silence for 20 years. The palace records were altered. And none of it held, in the end. Not because someone heroically uncovered it. Because truth has a weight to it, a presence, that eventually becomes too large for the space it is hidden in. This is not always fast. It is not always clean. But it is reliable. Kindness builds allies. Colette did not survive 18 years of hard circumstance through toughness alone. She survived because she remained kind, genuinely, not strategically. Mildred brought her wrist wrap. Jan stamped her form. Small acts of loyalty that came from the people around her because she had never stopped treating others as worth considering. What we give out tends to come back. Not always. Not quickly. But it comes. Actions carry consequences across time. The choices made on the night of the baby swap did not end when morning came. They reached forward through 18 years, through every person they touched, through an entire kingdom. The choices we make in moments of anger, or fear, or jealousy, do not stay in those moments. They travel. Consider what yours might carry before you send them out. Real nobility comes from character, not from blood. The Crown of Aurelia did not choose Colette because of her bloodline. It chose her because of what she had become despite everything that had been done to her. The royalty in her was not the inheritance. It was the courage, the refusal, the hope she maintained when the logical response would have been to abandon it. That is where the crown truly rests, not on a head, but in a life. Justice and revenge are not the same thing. When Colette had the power to destroy Kayla, she chose not to. This was not weakness. It was the most powerful thing she did. Revenge might have satisfied a moment. Justice, considered, proportional, honest, shaped the kingdom's future. The distinction matters in small lives and large ones. And finally, you do not have to have been loved correctly to be capable of love. Colette was not raised with warmth or safety or belonging. She gave all three of those things to the people around her anyway. She carried hope through places that had no business containing it. Whatever was taken from her in those 18 years, that was never taken. Nobody can take that from you.